My name's Fran Sladyk. I'm a forester for Butternut Mountain Farm. I'll give you a brief history of the business and my involvement with it, and that also kind of mirror the industry and why sugaring is so popular now. David Marvin, my employer, he started a company 50 years ago, and when he started it, he did everything he could to put back into it. So he bartended, he logged, he did consulting forestry, and he started sugaring and raising Christmas trees. And as the business started to grow, he didn't have time to deal with the consulting forestry. And so he hired a person before me, and I worked with her for a year or two, but I started full-time for him in 1988. And there were 6 employees there. There's probably like 120 employees now. We're one of the largest syrup packers in the state, ship syrup worldwide. And so my involvement when I was hired was the initial promise was I'll give you a third consulting forestry, you'll work on my property a third, and you'll work in the business, however that may be, another third. I happen to have one of my college jobs was driving a truck, so I had a CDL, so that came in very handy. So then, back then, we had 3 properties. We leased 1, we owned 2, and we had 18,000 taps in '88. That was a big sugar place in '88. We also had 2 ROs, and one of them had 20 membranes in it. The other one had 24 membranes in it. One of them cost $20,000 at the time. The other one cost $25,000 at the time. So those membranes, that RO, we'd take the sap from 2%, concentrate it to probably around 12 to 14. And we boiled with a variety of things, steam and oil. Those 18,000 taps were on older tubing. And if you weren't aware of it, tubing started out as medical tubing. It was very flexible. It stretched, it telescoped, so if you're trying to fit it on the fitting, it was pretty terrible. Squirrels loved it. One year, we went through 45 boxes of tubing just to repair squirrel damage. So it was pretty major. And so as we always had vacuum, but it was poor vacuum. People would call it farmer vacuum. If you went up to the extent of the sugar place, the highest part, you didn't have any vacuum. You could put a gauge on it. And we used to walk around the woods. We'd go around and set spouts, and so we'd go tree to tree once, and that was it. So one of the things that changed, a couple things that changed that impacted sugaring was those 2 ROs that I said we spent $45,000 on. We spent $18,000 and bought an RO about the size of a refrigerator that did the work of those 2 machines. RO technology went a long way. Also, tubing went from the rubber to polytubing, and polytubing was easier. The old rubber tubing you'd have to chew and put it on. They had tools for polytubing. And as people started to figure out how to increase production, they started putting up more pipeline and less tubing. So it takes a little longer to install, but it's easier to maintain. So if you add up the less maintenance, the ability to boil more sap with less energy, that is why people started really going full bore into sugaring. When I first started, most of the sugar places burned wood. They did their own logging, and with a small tractor or a bulldozer, and they did a good job. They would gut an area, maybe 10 acres, thin it, and then just move on every year. And they would concentrate on, you didn't see many monocultures, but they tended to be heavy to maple. When the industry, I think, really took off, and Mark might have something to say about it, but in '08, the first couple of years, I think there were poor years in like '06 and '07, and it dwindled the Canadian syrup reserve. In '08, Canada had a bad year, Vermont had a great year, and the bulk syrup price was double what it is now, almost double. So there were a lot of people hurting in the '08 recession, but sugar makers had money coming out of their wallets, and they just started reinvesting it in more property, more taps. People started leasing sugar places. So that is one of the reasons I think sugaring's expanded in the way it is today. So to go backwards in my history, one of the first jobs I did when I started working full time is we had 1,000 taps area that was probably about 11 to 1,200 feet in elevation, and it was all sugar maple and spruce. And the spruce ranged in size from this size to this size. We cut every damn spruce tree, and we put up 4-foot pulp, by hand. And we thought we did a great job. We were proud of it. And we probably took the basal area from maybe 100 down to 70. That next summer, we saw dieback. And we contemplated not tapping that area. But then you'd see dieback the same, probably 2 years of dieback. And we didn't see any really significant mortality there, but that told me what we did wasn't good. We started to be involved in other thinnings, and we, for the most part, do our own thinning. We did that spruce with a tractor and a bulldozer. But that taught me something, and then the other repercussions of that, not only were the dieback, but that understory came up to heavy beech and striped maple. Probably 10 years ago, we had a heavy, wet October snow. The maple in the overstory maples, the leaves were gone. The understory that held the snow, that late October snow, took 2 of us a week with a chainsaw to open up the main lines and tubing. So that's something you don't think about but it's definitely a concern. So, and also after we did that cut, you worked in a raspberry patch for about 3 or 4 years too, which was terrible. But that's showed me that maple does not like a heavy cut. I mean, if I could go back in time It would have been quicker for us to just cut the big spruce, wait 20 years, and go cut big spruce again. I think we would have had better regeneration. We would have had better maple growth. So then, and I'll go back to that area again, but and then I was involved in more lighter thinnings of our property. And because of my truck driving experience, I picked up a lot of syrup from different sugar makers. I already knew them probably around 2000, organic syrup. When the sugar makers are certified organic, and right now the organic surplus is 15 cents a pound. In 2000, it was 25 cents a pound. One of the requirements for organic certification is to have a sugar management plan. So I would say probably around then, a lot of sugar makers. I was attractive hire to a lot of sugar makers because of my Sugarbush experience and the fact that I sugar. And I started working for a lot of the bigger sugar makers in Franklin County. And I continued to see things that impacted what I thought and how I manage other properties. And a lot of those people, one of the unfortunate realities of it is someone will borrow money and buy this piece of land, and they'll want to log it in the summer where it's the worst possible time for basal damage, and they want to get it done as quick as possible so they can hang tubing and tap that next year. That's still a problem that people have to deal with. The other thing that you started to see was whole tree harvest in a sugar place. And I have seen some good whole tree harvest jobs in a sugar place, but I've seen some terrible ones. And one of the common things I see is on level ground. I think the impetus is to cut heavier, and then you start to see dieback, lack of maple regeneration. You also, depending on the operator, but one common thing you'll see in whole tree harvest is wide roads, probably double the width, and islands of wood, islands of maple. And I still believe the best method is a cable harvest in a sugar place. And I just think it's less impact. So I think you can, one of the harder conversations you have with landowners when they want to thin, I bought this property, let's thin it. And I want to set tubing up as soon as possible. Well, what about, can you wait a year? No, I can't. I have payments, I got to make them. I need to make as much, as I can on this. What about, when do you want to start hanging tubing? Tomorrow, Yeah. So you got to work with, and these are people who are established sugar makers. They have the property already laid out in their mind. They know how they're going to hang tubing. Okay, we can get Jim to log it, and he'll start it as soon as he can. But he'll cut trees in half, so he'll minimize the damage to your residual stand. But he's not going to be able to pay you full stumpage like John might, and they have to think about that. And I encourage him to go see Jim's job and John's job, so because that is what sells the quality of that work. It's your property. You can do what you want. I'm telling you, I would go with Jim, but if you want more money from John, then far be it for me. But you should go investigate that. And that has helped quite a bit. Yeah, you know, I think I will go with Jim. It's less money, but in August, the bark tightens. You see less damage, residual damage. And we've put up, we have put barriers around maples on, but that's time sensitive. But, and I think that has helped people get a better job in their sugar places. The other reality is it's slower, and you may have to talk to establish where do you want to set up tubing first. Do you want to go from the back forward? A lot of loggers like to work from the back forward, but maybe it makes more sense to work from the forward back so that they can fall behind with their main lines and tubing, or the left side of the property or the right side. You know, it could be different for every landowner, but you kind of have to establish that. So we've had some success in that realm. A lot of landowners, because with the current use, you've got to go back every 10 years. There are a few larger sugar makers I work for that now realize the benefit of a winter harvest, and they are planning on laying idle a piece of land to get that winter harvest. But that's not everyone. The other thing I can tell you, we talked a little bit about how poor tubing was when I started. They made rigid, the first tubing that came was rigid. It was like waterline. And they've improved upon that, and they call it semi-rigid. It stretches a little, but it kind of bounces back. So tubing's important because when you start thinning in a sugar place, your cutting cycle is directly related to your tubing cycle, your tubing replacement cycle. And the fact that the rigid tubing had a shelf life of probably 10 to 12 years. So you were gonna log on a 20 to 25-year cycle. I think some of the semi-rigid tubing is better. So that cutting cycle may be 25 to 30 years, you know? And I don't think, as tree health, it's probably not a bad, it's not terrible. Some of the people I work for are pretty, like to do crop tree release. So even if they're not going to commercially log, they're going to work on those understory maples in a crop tree release program. Other sugar makers are just going to do commercial work. They don't have time. The number of taps they have, they cannot go about managing that way. We, on our own property, David Marvin was a firm believer in crop tree release, pre-commercial thinning. Probably have done that on 100 acres, you know, of a 400-acre sugar place, but pretty intensively. And some of that we've done twice. And I like to take new sugar makers up there because his sister's property is right next door, and it's right at the sugar house. And you can see it was an old tapped orchard, so there's big maple like this, and on the sister's property, it's just maple thick like this. And where we've done 2 rounds of timber stand improvement, you know, we're tapping the trees that are on the sister's property that are this big, we got them to 10 to 12 inches. And that's with 2 rounds of cut and drop, which again is time sensitive. But if I take new sugar makers up there and show them that, it's a pretty good example of what can happen with some work. And I tell a lot of people, you know, we would get sent out for a week to do this. That's a luxury you may not have. But even if you go out there one afternoon a year, you're going to better your property than you will if you do nothing. I don't view it as view it as something you enjoy and making a benefit of it. Don't make it a ball and chain on it. So I talk about new sugar makers, and that with the advent of leasing sugar bushes, and there's a lot of people that just bought this piece of land and I want you to log it and I'm going to sugar it. And I've got J.R. Sloan is going to hang the tubing. In a modern sugar place, and if you don't have any idea of what you're doing, which is like a new sugar maker, access is, and it's hard for me to criticize someone who is busting their butt and have really spent, you know, a summer working on a sugar place. Oh, you know, you're a dumb idiot. You know, you can't. I have, you know, but.
Especially if you work for them.
But yeah, you're right. But one of them had a red maple stand and a sugar maple stand, and he said, and his dad was always on him. You're cutting. You shouldn't cut everything but maple there, you know. So I think he hated to admit Dad was right, but he saw the no issue in a red maple and big issue in the sugar maple. It's going to take a while for him to promote different species there, but I think the fear I have is with ash borer, beech bark disease, if we get beech leaf disease, well, there's 2 species gone. What's left? You know, that's not to say we shouldn't, you know, try, but yeah. And we have another frequent advice I give people is with ferns, and how do I get more maple in here? And we have scarified, that has worked. Doesn't work all the time, but a lot of times just if you skid some firewood in your skid path, you can see regeneration coming up in those ferns. So.
If you, when you go into a new untapped parcel, landowner wants to tap, fully stocked, do you always recommend they do a cut first? And if so, how often do they actually do it?
I'd say most of the time, I would probably say most of the time they already have a logger lined up and they want it cut. If I had to say, probably 75% of the time, 25% of the time, they're just going to set it up. But it's a race. It's a race. And I think a lot of them realize that they're not going to cut it for 25 years. So they might as well take the ash out, the money trees out. That's another reality that I could work for you and you may not want a maple cut at all. I might be able to talk you in to cutting a maple that's probably going to be a vacuum leaker, a real hollow tree. But I could work for Ethan, and Ethan might say, Ethan, some of these double stem red maples, you should cut those. Yeah, it's a loss of tap, but look, you're going to improve the single stem. And it's hard to talk, you can preach both, you educate them both, but if someone's got to pay off a loan, they want as many taps as they can right now. So sometimes we don't always cut the cull maple as we should. I can pretty much talk them into cutting trees that are vacuum leakers, especially if have sugaring in the past. And those are basically trees with hollows. You can see hollow.
What proportion do you think are people like considering forest management access? Or just you see people just setting it up and it's totally doesn't make any sense for forest management access?
I would say if they're maintaining a lot of people are putting the forethought into keeping their roads open. So I would say that action alone is in keeping it open for access to other stands. But yeah, you're always going to have the main line that crosses Area 2, and I don't want to cut Area 2 because I'm going to have to take apart that main line. We've had thinning where we've taken apart main lines even in the winter, and the logger has parked his truck. He takes it apart when the log truck comes, and parks his truck on the front side of it and walks in. During season, we've done that a couple times.
You mean like there's a quick connect or something?
Yeah.
I'm curious about properties that are enrolled or going to be enrolled in UVA. Like, how often do you see the issue about the ratio of acceptable to unacceptable growing stock? Does that show up often?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because the hard part is a good sap tree it might be considered cull, but it's healthy, So, I mean, it's not apples to apples.
Sometimes in my plans, I'll actually state that,
Yeah.
whether it's right or not. I state it and say that AGS is more related to the ability to produce sap than it is to produce timber.
Yeah.
And I haven't got any feedback on it yet.
Now, one of the things, on that same token, my boss bought 2 adjacent properties. One was landlocked, one wasn't. And they were both logged by the same logger, and they were high graded. And it's too bad they didn't take out more cull. So we're tapping some cull maple that we really need to cull. They're vacuum leakers. And we have started flagging them. And the idea is if it has 3 flags on it, we're not cutting the drop off, we're cutting the tree down. And that, just because it's so time sensitive to find that. Whether we cut the tree down now or not, we are flagging it. That is the game plan. So I don't know.
Fran, do you have a sense for, I know you were talking about 70 square feet, you thought it was maybe a little too heavy on that one site.
Yeah.
The one on the butternut property that you like the way that turned out, do you have a sense for the density of that stand after thinning?
After the basal area now?
Yeah, the one you did TSI on, you felt like actually was a good approach.
Oh, well, we've thinned that now several times. If I'm thinning a sugar place, I don't like to go below 80. And I've seen healthier places that were probably in the 90 range. But, and I don't want to, I think our average basal area was in the 80s for the sugar place. But I could tell you, it's where you toured. Yeah. It's where you toured the students a couple years ago. Another thing too that there's a guy I work for who still cuts his own firewood in Waitsfield, and he goes on that slow approach. And he got hit with forest tent. But I almost want to say, and he never sprayed, The two guys in Waterville sprayed. But this guy didn't spray. He had no repercussions, and I know he has a monoculture. He has like 95% sugar maple. But I think one of the reasons it bounced back was the history of light, frequent thinning. You know, I think that played more of an important role in it, even though he should have more diversity there. You know, I really do. But you know, some of the diversity is just, it's not management. It's just the way the maple are there on that mountain. So, another thing I've seen in Matts County that I don't think is great. Well, it's industrial land getting used to produce maple. So where I see where the people are saying, yeah, I want to make some money sugaring, you can walk the sugar places and you can say, yeah, you know, you can make money for 20, 30 years, but probably beyond that, you know, these were shelter wood cuts with a lot of basal scars on them. And the future's not there, you know. And I don't want to pick on your county, but you've seen it as well as I have.
Yeah.
Can I?
It is a long history of high grading. You know, a lot of our stands are not great, you know, soils to begin with. They're site twos, and you get a lot of, you know, release suppressed stems that are, you know, it's a maple tree, and folks think that because it's a maple tree, it's going to be a good producer for a long period of time. But yeah, it just doesn't have the vigor or the capacity to be a long-term economic opportunity.
Yeah, and it goes, and one of the things, I mean, I can't fault people for wanting to sugar. And I've had this argument or discussion, I don't say argument. When I started doing forestry, there were 5 hardwood sawmills within an hour drive from me. There's 1 now. But there are 5 syrup packers within an hour of me now. So I don't know if it's a good analogy, but is not jumping on the sugaring bandwagon the equivalent of keeping logging with a horse and not buying a skidder? You know, I don't know. Forest products change. Is this a blip on the horizon? Will we be doing something else in, 40 years? I don't know. But it's, but it is true that that's why there's such a, you can make a living sugaring, and that's why so many people are doing it now. Sometimes full time, families, and people are supplementing their income by selling sap or sugaring.
I have a question about some of like a high-graded piece of land or, a property that maybe doesn't have the best soils or something. Like, what are the economics of seeding, like intentionally planting maple, like sugar maple seedlings? Is that even something? Almost like you'd seed a hayfield, or like, I don't know if that is even, financially feasible, but do folks think about that?
I don't know. I mean, the problem with planting is if you don't protect that stem, you might be feeding deer or moose.
Sure. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
planting like with deer.
What I've tried to encourage people where they have the regeneration to do some improvement work, it was to start there, because you know what you're going to benefit unless you get hit with a bad ice storm.
I think the producer you're talking about down in like Waitsfield area leaves, if he has some regen, leave some tops covered and really make an obstacle, not a full-on wall.
Right, yeah.
I think if we're talking about the same producer, I think he's had pretty good luck. The thing is that it doesn't really necessarily fit the image of a sugar maker accessing the tubing, but as long as you keep the mains
Yeah.
relatively clear, and if you think about it less in terms of being able to walk in any direction at any time, and more about accessing your laterals and your mains.
Yeah, and I've told this to a lot of sugar makers because for us, the best way to thin your maple is to tear everything down and thin it and lay things down. But the world's not perfect. A lot of times we can loosen our main lines and jack them up. And we've done timber stand improvement work with a tubing tool, a chainsaw, and a pair of cutters. And you've cut tubing out of this room. Here, you just roll it up, you do your thinning, and you put it back. And it's harder, it's easy to do that if you're doing the work yourself. If you're having Log or Jim do it, it's a little harder. You'd have to work together. I guess it's not impossible, but we do that a lot, and I tell people that a lot. And now one thing that goes with what you're saying is when your tubing is there, if you know the tubing line's right here, and that's where you're going to walk a lot, you can lay that slash down here and leave it more. You don't have to cut it up so fine. So.
Another thing I'll do is, I always carry like a silky saw with me, a hand saw, and you can thin like 5, 6, 7-inch trees with that hand saw. It takes a little bit of time, and it's probably something only the landowner or the primary land manager are going to be interested in or qualified to do, as are most things related to improvement in the woods. But I do a lot with that. I'll take out 2 or 3 striped maple around a nice sugar maple, or a couple beech around a maple seedling. And, it's quick and you're right there. I'm not going to come back with a chainsaw. I'm not going to drop that pin on my GPS app and come back probably ever. But I have my silky saw right there. So, and as far as planting too, I planted like I think 15 2-foot tall saplings this year. It took me all day to plant those and fence them properly. And I already had the fence on site. I had easy access. So I think, again, when it comes to planting, it's probably going to be more of a hobby thing that never will pay off if you look at the numbers. But a motivated landowner who loves it is going to probably do it. But not, someone with 50,000 taps who has 10 employees. That probably won't be done at any scale, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Roy Course did that down in Whitingham in like 2008 when there was the
after the ice storm?
RPG was the place that had the super sweet maples. I think the what was the name of that nursery? RPM, RPG? Anyway, it's in New York State. I drove out there with Roy and we got a huge order.
How many did he
Well, we ended up getting like 2,000 and there were a bunch of different landowners that wanted them.
Saplings?
Yeah. But Roy planted successfully out of the others that got them. He planted the most successfully, and it was labor intensive, and he planted I think 400 super sweets in a field that he protected and watered, and I'm sure he could tell you what it cost him to do that, but today they grow fast, they're free growing, and he was just thinking about, that was back when talking about climate change and everybody got the scare like there's not going to be any more maples in Vermont. So
I'm always like, yes, there will.
yeah, he's like, there will be on my property and they're going to be sweet.
So I hadn't thought about that economics, like just in a field, but I mean, is that cheaper than like trying to find a parcel and paying for it, or leasing? If the per tap rate is like somebody wants $3.
One of the coolest things I saw was a teacher from Stowe lived in Johnson, and he was a sugar maker. He owned a sawmill in North Hyde Park, but he built his own subdivision. So when he sold you a house, it was made on stuff he sawed and he owned, and his son still sugars there. But anyway, this guy bought a house from him in the 70s, asked him if he minded if he could go down in April and dig out maples, because he had 10 acres. So he planted maples in 1970. He'd go down a couple years with a wheelbarrow in his April vacation and plant maples. He asked me 15 years ago, do you think I could sugar this? And they were all, your picturesque maple silhouette, you know, basically all crowns, but the diameters were like this big, and he taps 80 taps there, but they were all hand planted in a field. But it is very cool. It's still very cool, you know. So.
Are you hearing from any of the folks who work with any landowners interest in getting paid for carbon management or like carbon
Yeah.
programs?
Of working with a couple landowners in the Forrest family
Yeah. Okay.
now. When the Forrest family first announced a year ago, a bunch of sugar makers were interested. None of them have pulled the trigger. And the ones I'm working with aren't sugar makers. But I think sugar makers would be an ideal for that program.
Yeah, they do allow. Yeah, I haven't yet heard a Sugarbush enrolling, but apparently they are allowed to enroll. So I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah,
That one they did.
You did, yeah.
yeah. And
Two of them.
you're limited to the firewood you can process.
Right.
And you're limited to your stocking.
Yeah.
But I think it's all doable, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
they'll accept
if,
it. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a big, 50,000 tap Sugarbush. Didn't plan any cutting, enrolled in the program.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it likely
I-
means you'll
It's
have
not
to
it.
limit your
Right.
management. So there could be
It's-
negative consequences to
Right.
that depending on what the
Right.
condition is.
It's not real, but they
Right.
did make a bunch of money, yeah.
I mean, the Forrest family's only 20 years, but there are other carbon that are longer
Yeah.
that probably could conflict with current use, I would
Yeah,
think.
there's a no management.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And even the no management over 20 years.
Conflicts.
Yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So they
unless
have
you
to- they have to
qualify
enroll
for the
that.
new.
Enhance your woods, not grow older.
Right, the $200 per acre.
Right,
instead of the
$300 per acre, yeah. Yeah, so in a way, I'm surprised not more has,
Yeah.
but, you know, I don't,
I think, yeah, a lot of skepticism. Also, the contract is sort of, whether as a landowner you want to sign something that is a 20-year contract, you don't know what
Yeah.
hasn't fully been tested as a program.
Or it
Yeah.
might be a slow curve that's,
Yeah.
we're like here before start to see any other.
I can tell you, that one of the persons that I'm working with to enroll in that, he's not in land use, but he's landlocked, and he doesn't feel like he'll be able to do thinning in Area 1 in 2020 because he might not be able to get through. I admire him for that because a lot of people would want that tax break, but he's decided to go into this program to help pay the taxes. But also, he wanted to do some habitat work, and I got him access because I work for the 3 of his neighbors. So we're going to be in there doing some clear cuts, and he's just going to enroll the non-clear cut areas. He wanted to do a couple acres of clear cuts for habitat. The other 2 people that I've worked with just want to do it because they believe in the carbon. So we done?
Yeah.
Kick me off. Hook me.
Thank you.
It's a big hug out.
Thanks a lot, Fran.